Well, good morning. I know that a lot of you have been overly concerned and wondering, and yes, there is a terrible situation going on in the Ukraine. Just a reminder to all of you that this Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, a day of fasting, and the Pope has asked us to offer our fast and our prayers this coming Wednesday in particular for reparations against the sins being committed there. Forgiveness is a way of life. That's the theme that we've had these last 4 weeks. And today we're going to wrap that all up. So if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, we focused on the marks of confession as a way of guiding us to understand what it means to say forgiven. And that first mark is always contrition. That's sorrow. That's humility that we have to have before God to admit that we've done something wrong. The second mark is always the same. The second mark is confess it. You have to say what you did. If I can't identify what I did, I really can't change, can I? Then the third mark is the penance. What action am I going to take to make up for the sins that I've committed? What am I going to do to change my ways from that sinful person to a virtuous person? Now today it all comes together so beautifully in the readings that we have, which are phenomenal readings if you look at them very closely today, and in that last mark of what happens when you go to confession. Absolution, forgiveness, and the gratitude that wells up within us to thank God for his gift. Everything about being a Christian is about being forgiven. From the moment you were baptized until now, it's about forgiven. Christ already did it. We just have to live it. You know, I had a friend years ago, I was talking with him. He had been in a 12-step program for a long, long time. And we got to talking a little bit, and it was a really interesting conversation because at one point he was talking about, all the things that you do in the 12 steps, and he's going, and I said, what has been the most challenging part of going through the 12 steps? He goes, when I'm asked to sponsor a new person. I didn't expect that at all. I expected it to be like making amends with my family, trying to get people's trust back, staying on the wagon, doing all of that. He says, no. When you've gotten through it, and you've been clean for a while, one of the things that you do in a 12-step program is they'll give you the new person, and you're their sponsor. And you're the one that has to guide them and get them, to sobriety. And I said, well, why would that be a challenge? He goes, because I know where they need to end up, but I got to get them there. And sometimes it's a real hard, long journey. Because when you see the person, first off, you know their weaknesses because you've been down that path. He says, but the hard part is letting them fall and helping them get up again and again and again. And then getting them from the first to the second to the third step, getting them all the way through. He said, that's been a big challenge for me because I can see the end of their path, but I can't get them there any faster than they're ready to move. And as Christians, we're just like that. As Christians, some of us are at one point on the path, some are on the other. I say it all the time, and I'll say it again and again. We must remind ourselves that the expression that they used to describe Christianity in the very beginning was the way. They're on the way of Jesus Christ, the way of salvation, the way to eternity. We're all on the way. I like using that image again and again because it reminds us that we're never there until we're there. And so we're constantly growing and constantly moving and constantly getting closer and closer to Jesus Christ. And yet there are many times in our lives when we falter along the way. But God knows how it ends. That's why God is like my sponsor. I turn to God every time I need to get that next step, that next movement, that next, if you will, level of along the way. Christianity remains just that. We're on the way. And so we're not there yet. You ever notice that how hard it is to keep striving and keep going after it? We're not there yet. And that's why Christ gives us a community. That's why Jesus Christ asks us to operate together. Now, there have been a lot of misinterpretations of today's parable. And I want to be clear. Jesus didn't say that you can't help another with their faults. He said you have to be forgiven first to help another find forgiven. He was very clear about it. Remove the plank from your own eye, and if you hear a little later on, he says, then help the other. He didn't say, don't help the other, give up on them. You're a rotten sinner, you've got until you're, no longer a sinner, you can't. He didn't say that. He said, we need to work together. And that's the beauty of like what you see in the 12-step programs. These are people who work together. I've been there. I had the way. I know how to get there. Well, some of us are new. Some of us have been at this for a while. Some of us are at different points along the path. But we all have the same thing in common, the same destination. That same desire, as St. Paul was reminding us in the letter to the Corinthians today. It will be swallowed, death will be swallowed up in victory, he says. We don't fear death as Christians. We embrace it as that moment when we will be judged, and that moment when we want to stand before the Lord pure and clean and ready to enter the kingdom. And that's why Lent every year, I say Lent is a bit of a microcosm of the entire spiritual life. We enter into Lent every year, and as I said the last few weeks, some of us actually stumble into Lent. We don't actually sit and prepare our thoughts and our practices and what we're going to do for a penance and what we're going to do as a mortification. And then on Fat Tuesday, after we finish eating all the pancakes and the donuts and all the other stuff, and we feel, oh, I feel good. Okay, so what am I going to give up for Lent? And all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, I'll just give up chocolate. I like the kids that'll say, I'll give up my homework. Things like that. I'm going to give up hitting my sister. Give up hitting your sister all year long, please. These things that we kind of say, that we kind of implicitly are saying, well, I know it's not good to be hitting my sister. Maybe I should change that. I know that I shouldn't be overeating. Maybe that's why I'm going to give up sweets. But those are implicit little things that we just kind of take in a trite kind of a way. I'm a sinner. And if I understand what it means to be forgiven, I have to live forgiven. And that means that I'm not just going to look at Lent as an opportunity to suffer a little bit. You're going to suffer if you give up things. If you're fasting, it should be difficult. When I'm not eating during the day, I'm going to be a little hungry. That's the point. But if I don't know what the goal is, then it's senseless suffering. And Jesus didn't suffer senselessly on the cross. And Lent is always pointing us toward the cross, of attaching our sufferings to his redemptive suffering. On the cross, I was forgiven. You were forgiven. And I have the opportunity through the cross to take the beam out of my own eye, to take that beam so that I can help others get the splinter out of theirs. We all are forgiven, but we have to live forgiven. And so to obtain God's absolution, I have to go through all the steps. I have to come before a priest. I have to confess my sins. I have to do my penance. I have to receive God's absolution. But a big part of it started in the beginning when I was sorry. I also have to say, I'm going to change. So if I lied, I have to start telling the truth. If I stole, I have to stop taking what's not mine. I have to make restitution. If I lusted, I have to become a little bit more chaste and have my desires focused toward beauty and truth and goodness. You can go through any of the deadly sins and take a look at them and see how they can possess us sometimes. In much the way a person can be addicted to alcohol, to drugs, to gambling, to pornography, every one of the deadly sins is a form of spiritual addiction. It enslaves us. But Christ came to liberate us. You know, I was listening to a good reflection the other day from Bishop Barron, and he was talking about this whole thing of blindness. And in the beginning of the gospel, it's beautiful. He gives us this lovely image, the blind leading the blind. Anybody could see that in their head. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Of course they're going to fall and stumble, and you need someone who can see clearly. You, I do believe, each and every one of you sitting there, have that expectation of us priests. We don't want blind shepherds. We don't want shepherds who have that plank of wood in their eye. We want shepherds who will be there for us, who understand us, who, like a good sponsor, know where we need to get you and get you there, and be patient with you and work with you. We need, first and foremost, to live forgiven. You know, it was interesting, when I was first ordained, those first couple of years, it was kind of easy to get to confession because I still had my confessor up in the seminary, and I would go to him. And then after a little while, I kind of lapsed a little bit. And then one time I was at a thing and I had the opportunity to get back to confession, and I did, and I haven't knocked off since. I was sitting with a priest, I kid you not, I'm not going to tell you where, I'm not going to tell you what, so you can't figure in any way who this priest was, but we were talking about our parishes. And he says, my parish, he goes, I really don't like hearing confessions. I thought about that. I said, I love going into the confession. He goes, it's so boring. Sometimes I sit there for a half hour and nobody comes. In the course of the conversation, I'm going to speed the whole thing up a little bit for you. In the course of the conversation, I asked him about his own spiritual journey. I said, do you live forgiven yourself? I didn't use that exact expression, but do you live forgiven? He says, what do you mean? I said, when was the last time you yourself went to confession? Long, long, long pause. Like, how do I get out of answering this question? It had been 30 years as a priest. And I just looked right at him and I said, no wonder your parish doesn't seek forgiveness. Think about that for a second. If your leaders aren't living forgiven, I can't expect you to live forgiven. And that's why I myself make it a point, at least 12 to 15 times a year I try to get to confession, if not more. Blessed Mother asked us for once a month, unless you're aware of grievous sin, then go again. And yet so many Catholics don't treasure this sacrament. So many Catholics, and I'm going to say probably the reason why is your priests for a long time haven't treasured this sacrament. His attitude was, confession isn't fun. I don't like doing confession. Well, I'm sure when the penitent does come in, you're not the best confessor in the world. You're probably like stodgy, and you're not very sympathetic, and you're not very compassionate to them because you just, why would they want to come back? And I've had that experience, trust me. I've gone to a priest where I could tell on the other side of the screen, he really wasn't into what I was doing. And he was almost like to the point like, oh, come on, that's not really a sin, is it? I said, you don't tell me it's not a sin, you just absolve me. I shouldn't have to get into an argument with you in the confessional. Now you can maybe commit another sin while I'm in here confessing my sins. My dear brothers and sisters, it's a treasure. It's a beauty to get that plank out of our eye. And these 4 weeks we've been focusing on, and that plank sometimes is going to hang around a little bit. There's a line in one of the prayers at the funeral mass that just has always stuck with me as a priest every time I pray it. When we're praying for the deceased, there's a line that says, should any stain of sin have clung to him or her? And that's what we're doing. We're praying even that sin that clings to us. Even though I'm forgiven, even though I was absolved of the sins, the culpability for the sins I committed, there's still that side of me that clings to my desires, to my sins. So that person who has lustful thoughts walks out of the confessional forgiven, but might still be clinging to lust. That person who is an angry person who confesses might be forgiven for the culpability of the anger, but they still have that cling of anger within them. And so they get in their car and they have road rage on the way out of the parking lot. You know what I'm saying? We're like that. And that's why Lent tells us, break the cycle of sin by becoming a person of virtue. And so you saw in last week's bulletin, all the deadly sins do have virtues we can pursue and pray for. There are 7 deadly sins, there are 7 lively virtues. I tell people, take one a day, meditate on it at the end of the day, whichever sin you want, pride, anger, greed, gluttony, envy, sloth, and lust. Got them all just like that, see? Because I do it all the time. And I could give you all of the virtues too. At the end of the day, was I prideful today? Lord, help me be humble. Was I angry today? Help me be a little bit more meek. Lord, was I lustful today? Help me to be a little more chaste. Lord, was I slothful today? Help me to be a little more diligent. You can do this. This is what Lent is about. Where I see the heart of my sin, that's where I strike first. And then I ask the Lord, deliver me from that. I'm forgiven, and you're forgiven. Now we need to live forgiven. During Lent, we're going to have this new kind of an opportunity for you. It's called the 99. Now, if you hear that word, you're kind of probably jumping to that parable that Jesus talks about, the 99 sheep that stayed and the one that was lost. Trust me when I say some of you could be the one sitting here right now, so don't just assume that you're part of the 99. But that's not what it's about. It's a wonderful thing. It's going to be an experience. There's going to be 3 Tuesdays in a row where we're inviting people to come together, and it's going to be March 22nd, 29, and April 5th, is it? Yeah, April 5th. I always get the last one because it's got to jump to the next month, and I go, how do I do the 7 on this one? Anyhow, so those 3 opportunities. Now, it's going to be limited because we only have so many slots that we can fill. All the details are in the bulletin, how you can do this. And I'm going to encourage you to take the opportunity as parishioners to say, I need to be a better Christian. And Lent is my opportunity to grow in holiness. And maybe I'm going to take this 99 experience and be part of something that's going to be for the future of this parish, for the future of our Catholicism, for the future of our church. We're also going to be adding an extra opportunity for confession during Lent. Monday nights before the Holy Hour at 6 o'clock, one of the priests will be available. We're going to try to use these confessionals over here so you can come, confess, and be before the Blessed Sacrament. But we're going to try to do that. So come at 6 o'clock on Monday nights during Lent. You'll find one of the priests here available for you. I don't want you to miss the opportunities that are present for you during Lent. So look at our bulletin and look at all the opportunities, the Stations of the Cross, the adorations, the 40 Days for Life campaign, praying the rosary with us every morning at 8 o'clock or catching it later online, praying in community and asking the Lord for his mercy, because that's what Christianity is all about. I'm forgiven, and forgiven is a way of life. You're forgiven, and forgiven is a way of life. And when we live forgiven, you know what really starts to happen? We start to love one another and not see the other as a problem, as someone that needs to be punished. We see you as a person who needs to be forgiven. And forgiveness with a hug feels so much better than anger with a punishment. So hug one another, love one another, and forgive one another as Christ forgives you. Forgiven is a way of life. God bless you.